All right, so we are recording. I'm gonna give myself a second here. I got to give pauses because I have to go back and edit all these videos, and then I've got to splice things in. So, welcome everyone to the first of 6 workshops. We're gonna have when you used to buy a record or a cassette and it had a hidden song at the end, we're gonna have that. We're gonna have a hidden Q&A session at the end of all of this that I'll figure out in the future. You can pester me about that in the future. But what we're going to do is we're going to accumulate the questions that we get. We're going to collate them. I'll put them into a spreadsheet, and then we'll address all of the questions in one big Q&A with our facilitators at the end of all of this. So today is May 11th. It's the second day of back to learning at home for our kids. So I'm sure everybody out there in Zoom land is juggling 12 things at once right now, not the least of which is getting their children fed. So those of you that were able to join us, we appreciate it. Thank you for giving Shauna somebody to speak to. I'll let Shauna do a better introduction of herself in a moment, but Shauna is up at the University of Alberta in the Alberta Business Family Institute. And the reason that we're very lucky to have Shauna on board for the first 2 workshops this week and next week is because the concept of transitioning out of your business, selling it, or buying a business, or transferring to a family member or a key employee, is it's a big step. It's a big psychological and emotional hurdle that a lot of our rural business owners in communities like the Medicine Hat region have not really entertained fully. And so before we went into the nuts and bolts of how to understand your financial statements and the actual steps of selling, we're really lucky to have Shauna join us and explain to us the well, she could do it better than me, but the psychological and emotional hurdles that we need to get over, and just the mindset that we need to get ourselves into. So I'll have Shauna do a little bit of intro to that and to herself, and I'll turn my camera off and my mic, and I'll watch along. If you have any questions, we're not running a Q&A, so we're just going to run the chat. And by all means, join into the chat and throw your questions up there. I'm just going to let Shauna move through her workshop. This is a little bit of a different format for her, so it's a bit different, modified. So by all means, throw your questions up, and then when we get to certain points, wherever Shauna's comfortable, or the end, then she'll go back through, and if those questions haven't been answered, then she'll address them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shauna.
Thanks, Michael. So as you said, I'll just be full disclosure here. I'm used to being much more interactive when I do workshops. So I'm not used to being just the big talking head in this kind of Zoom world, but I'm going to do my best to keep it engaging and interactive for you. I am going to speak specifically to family enterprises and some of the challenges they face when they look at making some of these critical decisions Michael's talking about, in terms of, are we going to pass on to the next generation? Do we have the capacity and capability to do that in the next generation? Are we going to sell? Is there an opportunity for our employees to take over? So there's so many things that as business owners and family members we need to be thinking about as we look at transition and succession planning. So that's really going to be my focus for today, is just to give you kind of a framework, the context by which we help family enterprises look at a systemic approach to how they're viewing what's going on with the family, with business, and with ownership. And so I'm just going to quickly share my screen here and get my PowerPoint going. So we're going to talk today about the 3-circle model of family business, but I'm also going to give you some context. So I'm going to tell you why it's so important for us to provide specific resources to family enterprises in Alberta. So I don't need to do any of this etiquette stuff, but just log your questions in the chat box, and we will answer those as we go throughout the session. We'll take some breaks and answer them as they arise. So please feel free, if something's burning, just ask it then and there, and we'll try and address it as we go through. So why is family business so important? So I guess the larger question is, why would the University of Alberta put so many resources into family enterprise? And the reason being is we know for a fact that upwards, and it depends, there's been numerous studies done in the last 2 decades on how many family businesses there are in both Canada, the US, and across North America. And in some cases, upwards of 80% have self-identified as family businesses in some of these studies. So first and foremost, I mean, it's a huge, I often get the question, how do you know if you're a family business? And I always answer that, if you're asking the question, then you're likely a family business, or you have some component of family involved, but whether it be you mortgaged your house, so of course your spouse is heavily involved, or you took a loan from your parents to start out, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're working with your brother or cousin or your siblings. And so there's so many aspects of family involved in business. And really that is why the University of Alberta really dedicated 2 centers to the field of studies. So we have the Alberta Business Family Institute, which is my center. We are fully focused on outreach. So that's very unusual in a university context. But the reality being is that we know that the resources need to be out there supporting the family enterprises and the advisors that are serving them to understand more about the complexity of what it means to be a family enterprise and why transition planning needs to be a really thoughtful process. I would also share too that a recent study was done in terms of the research in the field of family business. And the university is #1 in the world in terms of family business research, in terms of the output. And our academic director, my academic director, Dr. Lloyd Steyer, is the #4 researcher in the world. So for such a little province as Alberta, when you look at the center or the universities we're being compared against, it's a really big feather in our cap and really speaks to the commitment to the university. And so really, why we are so interested in the research is that we really integrate that dedicated research into the practical application of the information that we share with the family enterprises that we work with. So this is me. I'm not going to go too far into this, but I was born into a 3rd-generation family business. I always say I was kind of being groomed for this role since birth for what I'm doing. I was born into 3rd generation. My husband and I have owned several different oil field servicing companies, construction companies, and now just completely 360. Before the crash, we were approached, and we're just lucky. I'd love to say that we saw what was coming, but it was just dumb luck that we sold out of our oil field companies just prior to the crash. And now we did a 360, and we have a large diversified apiary. So we sell all of the products of bees plus the bees themselves. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been quite a journey and a learning curve, but we absolutely love it. I'm also heavily involved with the Chambers of Commerce. I believe they're a great organization to support a lot of the family enterprises that we work with. And I serve on several advisory boards. And I'm also an adjudicator and advisory board member for the Family Enterprise Exchange, which is the national body that is supporting the FIA designation for advisors in Canada. So I just want to talk a bit about this idea of family business versus family enterprise. And why I want to do that is because in my opening comments, I talked about, okay, what do you want to do? If you are going to transition your business, is it going to go to a family member? Is one of your children taking it over? Or are you looking at divesting of the operating company? And then what do you have left? You still have a family enterprise because you still have the wealth and the assets to manage. So what I want everybody to think about is that, this is a complex system. When we talk about a business family, often what we're thinking about is just that operating company, whatever the operating company may be. And we're not thinking about the broader group of assets that a lot of these family enterprises are managing. So things like the financial assets, the investments. A lot of times, many family enterprises will have real estate assets. often held in holdcos, for instance. There could be heirloom assets like a family cabin, for instance, which is one of the most contentious, let me tell you, heirloom assets there is sometimes when we look at transitioning those. And they may have a philanthropic arm, so there may be a dedicated giving strategy that the family has, and we need to be thinking about how are we transitioning all of these things, not just the operating company, and is there opportunities created in some of these other branches for family members who aren't necessarily interested in running the business. So I just give you this context to just be thinking about, how broadly some of these family enterprises must think when they look at transitioning. And the other part to family enterprises I just want to highlight is that a lot of times they own more than one operating company as well. So serial entrepreneurs are serial entrepreneurs. So a lot of times they'll see opportunities in a lot of other businesses, and they may have investments into other operating companies, or they may themselves have other businesses as well. And this was a study done by Zellweger back in 2010 that just supports the fact that, these are complex systems we're talking about sometimes. So just some fast facts. As I said, upwards of 80% of businesses worldwide are family businesses. 35% of Fortune 500 companies. The most recent study says 60% GDP, so family enterprises contribute to 60% of Canada's GDP. They are responsible for creating 70% of the new jobs in Canada and employ 4.7 million people. But when you look at it, it's really staggering to think that 64% have no process or any idea how they're going to select a successor if they do in fact want it to transition to a family member. Or another really staggering statistic, 70% have suggested that they have no successor for the family enterprise. So how are we going to support them through this? I'm just going to, these are some of the, the first ones that come to mind when you think of some of the big family enterprises in Canada. So just share a few of those with you. So I just want you to think about this too, the financial performance of family firms, especially as we move into kind of how do we transition these things. The ROA, for those of you who don't know, and I suspect you probably already know, but the ROA is return on assets and the TSR is total shareholders returns. But when you look at family businesses versus non-family businesses, it's almost double in everything. So 33% more profitable and 15% faster growing. The ROA is 5.4 versus 4.1. The TSR is 15.6 versus 11.2. Revenue growth, 23 versus 10, and 21 versus 12 in income growth. So this speaks to a lot of attributes of family firms that I'll talk about, but this idea of, there's a lot more patient or stable capital, meaning that families tend to invest back into their businesses a lot more than they harvest the resources or revenue out of them. So why are family firms so strong? Common and similar values. So, we're brought up in the same families. We have similar ways of thinking, and we've been, given a certain set of parameters within our family context that are similar to those of our siblings and our parents. Again, that becomes more complex when you look at future generations, when you look at things like cousin consortiums, where could be potentially, several cousins owning together and being brought up in separate nuclear families. But then there's ways to manage that as well. There's strong commitment. We're awfully loyal to each other because we're family. I already talked about stable patient capital and why that's so important in building these really strong firms. Decreased costs. Now, I say that because this is kind of a double-edged sword. A lot of times when we look at decreased costs, it's simply because the family members are not taking out of the business what they actually should be. So for instance, they're not taking a fair market salary, they're just taking what they can and investing back in. So we don't necessarily say that that's a good strategy, and that's a conversation to have. But there are other ways that they decrease costs simply because they are family enterprises. and they're familiar with each other. And that's another double-edged sword, because, you know, that good old saying, familiarity breeds contempt, is true. And there is conflict that's created when families live and work together, for sure. But there's also a lot of positives around, you know, how we work together, or how, you know, for instance, my husband and I can just give him a look and he knows exactly what I'm thinking. So that can be a good and a bad thing, right? Depending on the context. So why are we seeing such a large failure in these family enterprise transitions? So, you know, it's really a breakdown of communication and trust, and everything that we talk about in terms of the education we provide to family business really focuses in on, you know, that communication piece, as well as establishing some governance structures that really support these families as they look at transition. And then, you know, so 60% is the breakdown of communication and trust. 25 is heirs that are unprepared for the roles and or haven't been held accountable for the roles and responsibilities they've taken on. And then 15% is all other causes, but, you know, that's 85% is stuff that we can support and help family enterprises with. And so I'm just going to take a pause there. I've given a lot of information, Michael, and I see there's a bunch of questions coming in chat. So maybe I'll just give you just a pause to see if there's any questions that need to be asked.
What's happening in chat is just me sending links and keeping people
okay.
up to speed. So
Sorry,
that's okay.
I didn't actually open it.
No, that's fine. I don't expect you to open it. You can just carry on. But that's great. Thanks for checking in. I've just put the ABFI info up there. I mentioned you talked about, you know, the family cottage. I just mentioned that we'll address a little bit of legal stuff in episode 6. Reminded people that these are being recorded, so that I'll send out the link later in the week. And then I was just going to welcome people who are staggering in after getting their children fed and going to the bathroom and doing all the other human functions that we need to do. I also have Drew here, and Drew is our he's going to be doing the lion's share of the presenting. So he'll be doing episodes 3, 4, 5, 6. So great to have Drew on board. He's muted and invisible like everybody else, but I might have him come on and introduce himself near the end if we have time.
Sure.
And with that, I'll get out of your way and send it back over to you.
Sure, sounds good. Nice to virtually meet you, Drew. Even though I can't see you, I do plan on attending your sessions, so I'll get to hear your content as well. So just to your point about the family cabin, and I did say it was one of the most contentious issues, but we have an entire 2-hour presentation that we do just around the family cabin, because there is so much to think about when you look at those transitions of heirloom assets. So anyway, let's move on. So, you know, there's all of these positive things for family enterprises, but what are the challenges? You know, why do I have a dedicated center to support transition for family enterprise? Why is it so complex? Well, we're family, so the number one reason really is the communication and the interpersonal dynamics that are taking place. We all have history with each other. We have embedded patterns of communication with each other and how we interact. And so really trying to manage and mitigate that is critical for family enterprises as they open up this conversation about what is going to happen with the company. How are we going to transition this? Do we want to transition to family? And you know, it's a conversation that's the business, you know, as entrepreneurs, we build businesses for the betterment of our families. So we want to make sure that when we look at succession and transition planning, that we're taking into consideration the family in some context, whether or not it's going to go to a family member, but taking into consideration that, you know, their health and well-being, you know, everything that the family has accumulated over the years is probably quite attributable to that business. So having the family provide some feedback to those owners and founders on what's going to happen is critically important. But like I said, we all have history. And so some of those challenges also are, you know, there's generational differences and there is resistance to change. Let's be honest, it's really tough. You know, when you have spent your entire life toiling to build a successful enterprise, it's really tough to even start to think about, what does that mean if I take a step out? Or what does that mean if I no longer am excited and energized to do my job every day? How are we going to manage that? And how is that going to how am I going to manage the impact that that's personally going to have on me and my own mental health and my own ideas for what my future is going to look like if I no longer wake up every day and put 12 hours into a business? The whole idea of, especially when you look at multi-generational, excuse me, I just had a tickle there. The whole idea of fair versus equal also comes into play, especially when you're looking at transitioning to siblings. And especially, you know, you have a group of siblings and you have, you know, 3 kids, let's say. Excuse me, one works in the business and is growing the business, and the other 2 are off doing their own thing. Can you treat them equally when you look at transitioning that operating company? You know, you really need to think about, what is the impact on that individual that's building the business, and you know, what is the view of those siblings? Some of the other challenges are the capital to fund both the family and the business. What I mean by that is the second generation does the second generation have the capacity to buy the shares of the company? Are they going to have to be gifted? And if so, what impact does that have on the senior generation or the retiring generation? And what do they need to take out of that business to fund their retirement? Excuse me, sorry, I've just got a tickle happening here. And then the idea that, you know, as you look at subsequent generations, this idea of disparate family goals, values, and needs. And so really thinking about succession, we need to be thinking about it as a division of the ownership, but also transitioning the management and thinking about how the family is going to be impacted in that transition. So why is it such a challenge for families? Really apprehensive, you know, don't want to open up that can of worms. There's some difficult conversations that need to take place. And a lot of times, often, there's been conflicts in the past that have been not managed or have been just shoved aside that need to surface. Some of those conversations need to surface. So it really, really is overwhelming sometimes to families to open up this idea of, okay, let's have a really frank conversation about what's going on. Not understanding the path through it. So, you know, how are we actually going to get through this transition? Not really knowing what resources are available to them or what different options are out there for them. The family members are not aligned in terms of what that vision is going forward. And everybody wants something different. And similar to not really knowing the path, but they don't even really know who to ask for help, which is why series like these are so important, to get information out into their hands, to realize that there are a lot of professionals out there that are effectively advising families and business owners through transition. And it's scary. Let's be honest about it. It's scary. There's a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration when you look at transitioning into whatever the next iteration of your life is and whatever the next iteration of the business is. So what is succession planning? A lot of times when we think about traditional succession planning, we will focus in on what we call the technical aspects of it. So that is all of the strategies that you need in place to be effective. You know, the estate planning, the tax planning, the strategic business planning, your investment planning, your financial planning, planning for your assets, and planning for ownership. What we want to focus in on today, though, is the family side, or what we call the relational things that we need to be thinking about. So how are we planning for leadership development for the next generation? If the intent is that we want this business to continue into the next generation, we need to be really proactive around how we are grooming those individuals into those roles, how we are bringing those, you know, business-minded children up from a very young age. How are we introducing them to the business, and how are we providing opportunities for leadership for them? We need to, think about the family planning. So how is this going to impact all of the different family members? And are we giving them a voice in that process? And that's the most important thing. Again, going back to my comments about communication, we need to give everybody in the system a voice. And so that's really why today's session around the 3-circle model kind of clarifies how we do that in a really thoughtful way. And then we need to manage the different relationships that are going on, because again, we're families. So we all know we have some family members that are really gregarious and outgoing, and we have some that are much more withdrawn. So how are we ensuring that they're all getting the same voice and, kind of an equal voice in the process? Conflict is inevitable, so I'm just going to say that up front, and I'll say it again when I show you the 3-circle model. It is inevitable. It's absolutely normal. I think families tend to think that they should never have any conflict, and that's just impossible, and especially when you look at a transition process, because different people have different views. So ensuring that, as family businesses, everybody realizes it's very normal for you to have conflict. It's just a matter of making it positive and having good outcomes as a result of the conflicts. And then we need to be planning for generations, different generations to potentially be working together, because the reality is our lives are lasting longer. And in some cases, we have situations where we have family businesses where there's 3 generations working together. And so, that senior generation does not have the same set of values as that junior generation, that one that's constantly on their device or their phone to answer all questions, where the senior generation may not even, have access to a computer or never used a computer. So just those types of challenges are also in play that we need to be really thoughtful about, and we need to be really proactive with the family on working on. So for the most part, when I talk to people, a lot of individuals look at succession planning that it's this transactional based approach. It's going to just all revolve around, checklists, and it's going to be all built on technical solutions. It's going to maybe take a couple of years to complete, and succession is an event. Once you sign all the documents, it's done. It's a done deal. So very, very linear like this, thinking that, we're going to do all these steps. This is our checklist, and it's going to end, and our transition is done. For family enterprises, that is not the case. This is what it looks like for family enterprises. The squiggly line goes off the page and comes back around and just continues, because it's an ongoing process, especially if you have a family business that you really want to see it continue into the 3rd, 4th, 5th generation, whatever generation you may be at right now. So there's a lot of things to be taking into consideration, and a lot of things that, quite honestly, just aren't even on our radar, because we don't think about it in that context. But getting the family together to have that conversation, is this a legacy? Is this our legacy? Is this really what we want to have happen? So as a family, is that our vision? Then we need to start putting some planning in place, and we need to be taking into consideration all of those relational or transformational items I was talking about. Things like prenups, for instance, really hard conversations to have with family, because it's just not, if it's not normalized, if it's not something that we've been doing for generations, how do we introduce that concept to our kids? Because the reality is, spouses coming in and potentially out of the system can have a huge impact on the health and well-being and the wealth of the family. So having those conversations with our kids that if you're bringing people into the system, we need to be really clear with them, where the boundaries are around, whether it's the operating company, whether it's an heirloom asset, whether it's the real estate assets, where the boundaries are around what can be impacted by something, negative happening within that relationship, and ensuring that everybody's on board with that. I'll just share a really quick story around this one, because it was one of those situations that I think about it often. It was very early on. I've been doing this job for almost 15 years now, and it was very early on when I came on board with ABFI. We were called into a situation where the morning of the wedding, Dad asked his son to get his bride to sign a prenup. And I think what happened is the lawyer who was also a really good friend, had flown in the night before for the wedding. And I think over some scotch and cigars, they got talking the night before about the fact that this could have a huge impact on your business. And have you given consideration to this? And so the dad decided, within 12 hours that this was going to be a requirement. Obviously not the way you want to introduce it. And the wedding didn't take place that day for obvious reasons. It did end up taking place about 6 months later, but at a huge cost to the family in a canceled wedding, and all of the things that, all of the emotions that get tied to that too. So, I just share that in that, if it's normalized, if it's something that would have been introduced, if they would have had that 6-month runway for the couple to actually understand the impacts and why this was so important prior to the morning of the wedding. It's not a negative thing. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's just, we're preserving this wealth for your future children. Really, at the end of the day, we're just wanting to make sure that it's there to be transgenerational wealth that we can pass down for all of your children and their children. So let's get to the meat of today's presentation, the title and the reason why we're here. So this is the 3-circle model of family business. And this model was established at Harvard in 1978 by 2 professors there, John Davis and Renato Tuguri. And really the intent of this model is to help us understand the complexity and how we can create some context around the complexity and all of the individuals that are potentially in the family business system. So as you can see, there's 3 circles. There's the family circle. So people in that circle are family members, whatever that definition of family is, however the family wants to define it. It's the ownership circle, and it's the business circle. And so really there are 7 different perspectives you can have when you look at this model. So number 1 is a family member. So this is an individual who's in the family, whatever the definition of family is for that group. They don't own shares and they are not in the business. Number 2 are owners. So those are outside owners that would potentially be investors or other partners that are not family members and not working in the business. Number 3, those are your key employees. So those are all of the individuals that are working in your business that aren't family members and don't own shares. Number 4 are family members who own shares but don't work in the business. Number 5 are people who are working in the business and own shares but aren't part of families. So that's when you talk about ESOPs, for instance, employee shareholder arrangements. That's the individuals you're talking about. Number 6 is a family member who's working in the business. And number 7 is that individual who's in all 3 circles. So those are the owner founders. Those are the senior generation that they're in the family, they own the shares, and they are running the business. And, I did a presentation down in your neck of the woods in Lethbridge about 4 or 5 years ago and introduced this model. And I had one senior generation stand up at the back of the room and put his hand up and said, "I know I'm a 7 because I feel pressure from all of those circles." So it made it very clear to me that, yeah, there's a lot of pressure involved in being in that 7th position. So there's a few things I want to share with you about this model. First of all, having the right conversation in the right circle. So ensuring that we're not, as we always do in family business, we're not diluting our Thanksgiving dinner with talk of business. And in the business, we're not making family decisions that could have a detrimental impact on the operations of the business. So getting owners really clear about having the proper governance and communication for each circle, first and foremost, have meetings with family that include just the family, people in that circle, have meetings for the business that include just the individuals in the business, and having meetings for the ownership group that just include the owners to make some of those critical decisions, because there's a lot of decisions that need to be made in all 3 circles, and you need the right people on the bus for each of those conversations. And so the interesting thing about this, and I've already said it, we know for a fact that there's some truisms in this model, but I already told you the first one, which is conflict is absolutely inevitable. We know it's going to happen. So how are we managing and mitigating that is really important. The next one is really, really critical too. Where you are located in this model. So if you're a 1 through a 7, wherever you are, wherever you have identified yourself, directly impacts your perspective on what's going on. So think about that. If I'm a family member who doesn't own shares and is not working in the operations of the business, I can often feel pushed aside when decisions are being made and don't have all of the information or understanding of what's potentially happening, which could create a lot of, elevated emotions and feelings of, just being not understanding what's happening and feeling really rejected in that. So how do we open up that line of communication so that family members are getting good information about what's going on in the business, about what the intent of their parents or the senior generation is around who's going to own the business, and is there an opportunity for me to be one of those owners, having some of those conversations. So you could see how that would be very different from a person who is in that 7 position, who is privy to all of the information, and quite honestly, in a lot of cases, has a lot of that information just up here. It's never been documented. So how do we get it out of here and into some sort of formal planning that can support really positive and effective transition planning processes? And then the other thing I would say about the model, we don't consider it a truism, but it's something I always like to share, is that you move around this model. So as you look at transition planning and into, especially with family businesses, if you're looking at transitioning it to the next generation, those individuals are going to move through the model. So potentially in the first stages, they're going to move from a 1 to a 6, where they're introduced into the business and the leadership development and what that means in terms of timelines and what do you have to do to be the next CEO of the company. And then also, if they're going to be transitioning from that 6 up to a 7 to potentially being owners, what are your responsibilities as owners, and what is your responsibility as a steward of this asset for the next generations? So of course, you need to be thinking about that it's not a static model, that people will, as we look at transition, have different perspectives because they'll be moved into different positions. But essentially, critically important is to think about the right conversations in the right circle, and about, okay, so maybe gaining a broader understanding. When I look at my siblings, I understand now why Anna doesn't fully understand the decisions we're making, because we haven't given her the information that we're privy to because we're 6s, or whatever the case may be. And just gaining a broader understanding of those individual perspectives is really critically important. So are there any questions on the model itself? I would share with you, we do a program called Roadmap. It's an extensive program, and we had one family that they went through Roadmap in November, just before Christmas. And the 3 daughters in the family, for a Christmas present for their dad, they found the information, the application of this model so impactful to their family that they actually gave their dad, as a Christmas present, 3 hats, 3 separate hats. And they asked him on Christmas Day to please put his family hat on and keep it on all day, because he tended to always have that business discussion at the dinner table. So I just share that with you because I thought it was such a, an illustrating example of how impactful the model can be for families, that they can really embrace the idea of separating these circles, but also ensuring that information is conveyed and shared throughout. Okay, so Michael, I saw you come on and then go off again, but are there any questions?
There's no questions right now. This is great stuff.
Okay.
I think everybody's just absorbing. So yes, the second I came on, I was interrupted by a child. So I will disappear again and let you carry on.
It's all good. It's the world we live in today.
Yes.
Okay, so I went through all of this. This is just a listing of what I've already told you in terms of what those 7 quadrants were. And just a couple more things that I just want to highlight about this model. Like I said, it was developed in 1978, so it's been around. It's stood the test of time. About 5 years ago, McKinsey tried to do what they called a 5-circle model, which lasted for like a blip. It was like just a blip on the radar, because We don't want to create more complexity. What we're trying to do with this model is make it simplified so we can provide really dedicated education and resources to support families as they look at transition. Also, you really want to make note of the fact that the boundaries between these three circles aren't solid. So we're not saying that you're going to do, all of your family is going to have your family meetings and you're going to have those conversations, and that's going to be done in a silo. And then we're going to go do the same thing with the business circle, and that's going to be done in a silo. And then we're going to go do the same thing with the ownership circle, and that's going to be done in a silo. Well, that's not how this system works at all. The idea is that these are permeable barriers. So the information has a process or a way to flow through. So back to my previous comment, how are we educating those family members who aren't in the business about the operations of the business, about the opportunities and the challenges, and why some of the decisions we're making are being made? Making sure there's a logical way for information to flow through the system is critically important. Okay, so I always like to share other voices, and because I'm not used to being the talking head that I've been today, I really wanted to share this video with you. It's just another way, it's the same information, but from another voice. So I'm just going to share a quick 5-minute video with you that will just kind of reinforce the learning of the three-circle model, why it's so important. And just with, like I said, just another voice that is not just my talking head out here. So enjoy. It's about a 5-minute video, and I am going to just turn my camera off just to make sure that I don't in any way hurt the integrity of the video.
Hi, this is Amelia Rankert-Thomas of Engaged Ownership, and we're here today with Family Business Basics. We'll be talking about the three-circle model. The three-circle model was developed in the 1970s at the Harvard Business School by Professors Renato Tajuri and John Davis. It illustrates the three interrelated and overlapping groups that make up the family business system: family, ownership, and business. Each of the 7 segments of the model represents a different group of stakeholders. Number 1, family members who don't work in the business and don't own shares. Number 2, non-family owners who don't work in the business. Number 3, non-family members who work in the business and don't own shares. Then the overlaps.
Hey everybody, it's Tony Robbins. Listen, I'm reaching out to you right now because I'm mad. I hope you are too. I'm so...
Number 4, family owners who don't work in the business. Number 5, non-family owners who work in the business. Number 6, family members who work in the business but don't own shares. And then those in the center, family owners who work in the business. Very often you'll find in 7 those who have significant leadership positions in the business. What segment are you in? One of the really valuable points of the three-circle model, and the reason we use it so much, is that the individuals in each of the 7 segments are likely to share a common perspective and set of concerns. And you can predict what concerns individuals might have simply by knowing what segment they're in. For example, number 2, the owners section. Am I getting adequate information about my investment? Will I get an adequate return on my investment? Will I have an opportunity to exit? Whereas those in circle number 1, the family circle, are concerned about issues like, will the business hurt our family relationships? Will I ever have a chance to work in the business or own shares? Does our business help or hurt our reputation in the community? Can I leverage my connection to the business to help me achieve my goals? And those in number 3, non-family members who work in the business but don't own shares, would ask, can I achieve my career goals here? Will nepotism block my path? Will I be compensated fairly for my work? Will the workplace environment be more challenging because this is a family business? Recognize that the individuals in the overlapping segments have all of the concerns of the circles that they're in. So, for example, those in number 5, non-family owners who work in the business, are concerned about ownership issues. Will they get adequate information about their investment, an adequate return on their investment, and have an opportunity to exit? They will also be concerned about career issues like achieving their goals, concerns about nepotism, compensation, and workplace environment. Those in number 6, family members who work in the business and don't own shares, have the concerns about their family relationships, whether they'll have an opportunity someday to own shares. Their concerns about their relationship in the community and their reputation, and whether they'll be able to leverage their connection to the business to achieve their own goals, along with career goals and concerns about compensation and workplace environment. Similarly, those in number 4, family owners who don't work in the business, have those same family concerns along with the ownership concerns of, am I getting adequate information? Will I get an adequate return? And will I have an opportunity to exit? Those in the center, number 7, family owners who work in the business, have the concerns of all 3 segments, family, ownership, and business, plus a concern about keeping their lives in balance. So I think one of the lessons to take away from the 3-circle model is that it can tell us a lot about family-business conflict. In particular, when individuals in the system are not getting along, when there's a major issue, it can be valuable to stop and say, what segments are these individuals in, and how might their basic concerns be affecting their perspective on this issue? In other words, do the segments help to explain the disagreement?
Geez, we even got a surprise guest appearance by Tony Robbins in that one. So what a great day it is today. Okay, I'm just going to go back to my slideshow here. So I hope you found that helpful in just articulating some of the different perspectives and concerns individuals might have in that 3-circle model. So I was going to, just in the interest of time, I see we only have 9 minutes left. So I was going to give you 5 minutes to place your own family on the 3-circle model and just gain a broader understanding or perspective on how the decisions and some of those different perspectives that were just outlined could be prevalent in what needs to happen in terms of conversations around the transition plan or succession plan going forward. So I would encourage you to do that. Take some time after this, or maybe you come back and view it with your family at some point. Maybe take some time to do that and plot your family and just kind of gain perspective on where everybody is in that system, and what conversations do we need to have for those family members. And so the other thing that's really interesting about the 3-circle model is that we know it's an inherent paradox. So what I mean by that is 2 opposite truths existing at the same time. So 2 competing priorities that are realities that have to coexist together. And so, of course, some of them being, as family, we're very accepting and we're emotional and we're loving, but we're also very private. Where a lot of times, in order to be a good business, you need to be public, you need to be competitive, and you need to be changing. So how do we manage that paradox? And then in the ownership, the paradox of, we're thinking about the management of the business, and we're thinking about profit and marketability and information that we need in order to make good decisions as shareholders. And sometimes that is an indirect opposite to what is actually going on for the family themselves. So just think about that as well, that, we do know there are paradoxes, and managing that is really the importance of why this model exists and supports families the way it does. So when you look at succession planning from a strategic approach from a family business perspective, and now with the lens of the three-circle model, you need to know that it really includes the technical elements, but has to be first driven by the needs and the wants of the family, the wishes of the family, because it's really hard for technical advisors to put good plans in place if they don't actually know what the vision is or the outcomes are. And it's an ongoing process. So once you start this planning, especially, I'll go back to my previous comments, especially if you want this to be a legacy and continuity is your objective, that you want this to transition to generations of family, then the planning never stops, because as I said, it's not static, it's constantly changing. People are moving in the model. So we need to be constantly thinking about planning for the next generation and the next generation after that. It's a long-term approach. So this is not, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're done. Like I showed you, that linear plan that, in 2 years, you're going to be done and you're not going to have to worry about this stuff anymore. That's not the case. It's a long-term approach because it's ongoing, and it has to really encompass the family dynamics, because I think a lot of times that piece is forgotten as we talk about succession and transition planning. It requires the really thoughtful transfer of knowledge to the next generation, and how are we getting all of those plans that are in the founder's head out onto paper so that we can create some vision for the next generation around trajectory. And again, just considering all of the assets that I showed you, from the family enterprise model, we're not just talking potentially about the operating business. There's a lot of other assets there that we need to be taking into consideration. And we need to be thinking about the 3 circles. And the planning process includes the whole family, not just the family members that are active in the business, because a lot of times that's what the family members that are working in the business will want to have happen, is that they are the only ones involved in this process. It cannot be that way. It has to include the voices of all the family members. And then you really need to make sure that you're clear on integrating your advisory professionals in as you make some of these decisions, so that they can put those transactional plans in place that are so important to support successful outcomes for the transition process. And then essentially what it comes down to is we need to apply governance in the 3 circles. So what we'll talk about next week in family business systems is we'll talk about the family business system as a whole, and what governance and communication mechanisms can we put in place to support the family to making some of these having these critical conversations in order to make some of these decisions around transition and succession. And I'll go back to my comments right at the beginning. I'm not here saying that every family business should be passed down to family members. That's definitely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the conversations need to happen so that those owners or founders can identify what are their options around transitioning out and what is going to be best for the family. And that's not always necessarily the transition to next generation leadership. So I just want to make that really clear. It's not only the management of the business that matters, the active management of the family is of at least equal importance. And I share this with you because this is the chairman of an advisory board, a European company that was founded in 1775 and currently has 600 family shareholders. So can you imagine the complexity of managing that? But he is just a proponent and an advocate for the fact that the conversations that they have in that family circle are even potentially more important. And, we've seen research that says at the end of the day, when you talk about legacy and you talk to founders, the financial wealth is not the legacy that they want to leave behind. It's all of the things that they've given their kids on the social side, their faith, their values, the way they are in the world. They really credit that to being way more important than the wealth that they're going to transition to them. So just thinking about that is really important. So I left exactly 2 minutes for questions at the end. And there's all of my contact information. So if anybody wants to reach out, I know Michael shared the ABFI website. We have a lot of stuff going on. We have a masterclass going on right now, a virtual masterclass going on for family enterprises who are interested in diving really deep into this stuff. We also have a lunch coming up at the end of the month, a webinar that we already have about 127 people registered for. So we're excited about that one. So I just encourage you to take a look at our website. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot of opportunity. All right, back to you, Michael.
That was great. Thank you so much, Shauna. Oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm just gonna have to talk over that. I hope that doesn't bother you too much. So yeah, thank you so much for that. That was great.
Do you want me to dance? I could maybe dance.
You can dance. That'd be great. I'm not dancing.
I could dance to it. Yeah.
This is something my son has on my computer, and it drives me insane. There we go. It's gone. Yeah, there goes his allowance for the month. Okay, so that was really fantastic. I've been in business. You've been in business. You're a really wonderful person to be able to share this. The anecdotes were excellent, particularly the wedding. What a disaster.
The non-wedding.
And speaking to Drew and speaking to Hillary, who will do the legal component, they always say the same thing: is that it's you got to get out in front of this stuff. And I think that was really great advice to expect conflict, right? Conflict happens, but if you can frame it and you're determined to get through it, you're going to be fine. Yeah, I'll leave it open.
And provide some resources and governance for that too.
That'd be great. I'm really looking forward to next week. So all of you who are registered for this week, register for next week if you're not already. And yeah, this is going to be wonderful. And I'm really glad that we've done it this way. So we get this 3-circle model going, and then we can start to look at the details, right? This really needs to be laid out first. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Shauna, for...
No, succession is about both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say succession is about both. It's about balancing the technical with the transformational. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is great. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure the attendees did as well, and I'm sure they're poking their way through the ABFI website right now. So this was recorded. Discord notifications to play Minecraft and all. Oh, and Tony Robbins. He's angry.
Exactly.
We moved along. He's a big guy. Don't want to anger Tony. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, thanks Drew for that. If anyone has any questions, by all means, email me or email Shauna. I'll pass them along, and I'll let you get back to your day, and have a great week.
All right. Thanks, Michael. My pleasure.
You're welcome.
See you next week.